One of my favorite parts about new planner setup season is getting to take a look back on what worked and what didn't in the prior year and consider how I can make tweaks or changes to my lineup to help me better in the year ahead. The best way to plan the way forward is to take a look back. So in this video, we'll be having a look at my planner lineup for 2024, including what wins and what challenges I had with those, the experiments I tried in my journals this year and how they panned out, the changes that I'm making to my system for 2025, and the journals that I'll be using to accomplish that. Let's have a look. In 2024, I used a total of 14 notebooks. I had 2 everyday journals, one for the first half of the year and one for the second, my yearly collections journal, my long-term collections journal, a 5-year journal, a reading journal, a goal planner, 3 R&D or research and development notebooks, 3 Scribble books or brainstorming books, and I also introduced a health journal partway through the year. Remember, not all of these got used every single day. The only ones that actually get an everyday touch are, funnily enough, the everyday journal and also my 5-year journal. The other ones are used either when they're necessary, some of them are kind of like reference books, some of them are more like just for fun notebooks, some of them I have specifically because of this YouTube channel, but all of them serve a specific function in my system. Having a closer look at the lineup for 2024, I started the year in a square notebook for my everyday journal. I love this design. I am now very much a sucker for a full cover design, so I know I'm going to be using more of those going forward. And I went into this one having just finished in a square. Come the end of this notebook though, I was very much missing the tried and true A5 size, so I jumped back into that, and I have been enjoying being back in an A5. That's not to say that I will never use a square again, it is definitely my second favourite size, at least for an everyday journal, but moving into this one kind of just felt like coming home, plus the rainbow holographic foiling. So beautiful. I mean, technically speaking, you don't see the foiling when you're using the notebook, but when it's sitting there on my desk closed, it just sparks a lot of joy to look at. When it comes to my yearly collections journal though, this is a notebook that I use year after year. So if we open this one up, hello, it is me. You can see that this one actually started in 2022, and I've been using it for yearly collections. Funnily enough, that's why it's called the Yearly Collections Journal since that year. So we have 2022, we have 2023, and of course, given that it's in the 2024 lineup, 2024. Come the end of my 2024 setup though, I've only actually used this much of the notebook, so there's still a decent chunk of it left for more yearly collections. So definitely able to fit 2025 and probably also 2026. The notebook is having some wear and tear, but I've just stuck a piece of black washi tape over this corner and that seems to be holding up pretty well. The long-term collections journal though is one that does need a bit of a revamp. I've been finding that there are just some layouts in here that every time I see them, they make me like kind of annoyed, mainly because they either don't fit the purpose of the notebook or the styling of the pages isn't in keeping with the rest of the journal. I also selected to have this notebook as my long-term collections journal when this was the only A5 white dock grid notebook that I had from Archer and Olive. Since then my collection has expanded, which means I have some different cover options, because if I had to today pick a notebook for my long-term collections journal, I wouldn't really go with this one. Red isn't really my preferred notebook cover color, or at least if I'm gonna pick a red, I want it closer to like a burgundy or a deeper, darker red, rather than this like punch you in the throat kind of red. This notebook not only has long-term collections in terms of like written collections, like this one's related to TV shows, monthly layout ideas, weekly layout ideas, but in the back of this notebook we also have swatch pages. This functionality, super useful for this notebook, but I think it would actually be better served being in its own notebook rather than in the back of my long-term collections. I'm currently into my second year of the 5-year journal. This one just has a space for each day of the year, for each of 5 consecutive years, to write down some stuff about what's going on. It also has space in the front to do little summaries about those things. So this is the summary for 2027, 26, 25. So obviously this one I'm still probably going to be using, given the fact that I actually have been able to keep up with it, which is quite an achievement. I think it's probably because I made the requirement for doing entries in here really super easy. It's just write 3 lines about what was going on in the day. Doesn't have to be anything specific. You can have it about wins, milestones, frustrations, challenges. I also keep this one beside my bed, which is a nice kind of like signal at the end of the day saying, hey, make sure that you update this one. fill in what's been going on. My reading journal is one of those ones that I held off on for a very long time because I just thought like, oh, you don't read enough, like you're gonna set this notebook up and it's not gonna be used at all. And this has been one of the most fun things that I have ever done journaling wise. It's just been like a really fun, creative space. For instance, doing the inside cover here in the kind of like fantasy map style, that one took a hot minute, but I love the way it looks. It was just a really enjoyable creative activity. One of the slight issues, I mean, you could call it an issue, but one of the things that I don't like as much about it anymore, maybe, is that all of the pages in this are browns and beiges. And that's not to say that I don't like the look of it, because I do like the look of it. There's a reason that I've kept the color palette consistent throughout the entire of the notebook. But I have been finding I'm getting a little bored with it now as I've been using this journal since 2023, but it would also feel kind of weird to, given how much of this notebook I've used, you can very nicely see how much of the notebook I've used. It would be odd to change the styling for just that much of the notebook. So even though I haven't used up every single page in this one, this is going to be a notebook that I retire and make anew. Look at that chunk though, absolutely beautiful. Like if we compare it to the 5-year journal, you can see how much it's grown. These notebooks have the same number of pages. The goal planner was an addition that I was actually a little bit apprehensive about, but it's worked out quite well. As the name kind of suggests, it's a place to plan out my goals, but mainly because my goal setting and goal planning can be a little bit messy, I wanted it to be separate from my regular everyday journal because I do get just like a little bit precious about how things look in there. This is actually the only notebook that I have in my lineup where I use my everyday handwriting. Like if we flip to one of my goal plans here, you can see this doesn't have the regular all caps that I use in all of my other journals. I appreciate that I've kept the supplies used in each of these very minimal. It's just like a grey line and then black pen. And as of current, I've used up to about here in the notebook. So I still have a decent chunk of space left for more goal setting and planning. Need to make sure I don't introduce any more blue joes to my notebook lineup for next year. In terms of the R&D notebooks, or research and development, those ones are effectively really just used to make idea videos for the channel. So rather than setting up all the layouts in my everyday journal and filling them up very quickly, I set them up in here instead. At the moment, this one is completed, so not going to be moving forward with that one. This one still has some space, and this one has a very small amount of space, so I'll probably prioritize using this one up completely, then moving on to finishing off this one. I can already foresee though I will probably need more R&D notebooks next year, but I do actually also have 2 other R&D notebooks that are on the go. This one having quite thin pages, so it's usually just done for kind of like scribbly things that I'm doing in videos. Stuff that I'm not like gonna take a picture of and put on Instagram kind of a thing. And then this one is typically done for anything that's like very kind of original bullet journal method-esque. Mainly because the way that this notebook opens, it doesn't lie quite as flat as like the Archer and Olive or the Typhosi ones. So I really only use it for when I'm doing very minimalistic designs. And we also have the ongoing Traveler's journal size. That one is also for ideas on the channel. The square notebook size, which I used in a square notebook layout ideas video for this year. And also this B5 notebook as well. So technically speaking, I do have more R&D notebooks, but in terms of ones that I am actively using, it's really the A5s. Or more specifically the A5s with 160 GSM paper and a lay flat binding. My Scribble books have been a very enjoyable addition to my lineup, and I've primarily been using these soft ring ones from Kokuyo. I think they're in theory supposed to be good for left-handed people because they're not really kind of obtrusive and they're flexible, like soft ring kind of things. But I just find the paper in them quite nice to write on, and I also like that they're grid, not dot grid. I don't know why, I just kind of like grid for doing these messy kind of notes and then like brainstorming and stuff like that. Previously, my primary Scribble book was the Brainstorming book, which is a letter-sized notebook from Archer and Olive. This one has lined paper though, which isn't really my preferred for brainstorming, which is why I'm now more so using these guys. That's not to say that this one won't get used, it's just not the primary focus right now. As said, I did also introduce a health journal this year with very good intentions about how I was going to use it. This one was more so a reference book rather than a log or a tracker or anything like that, which does mean that I I don't ever have the intention to check in with it every day, but I do wish that I had checked in with it more. I'm going to have to put some thought in moving forward to how I can make myself utilize this more, but I do have some ideas of other layouts that I want to add to this one, and I do appreciate having the reference materials for the things I have set up in here, mainly around stuff related to PCOS or sleep, anything that's health related and an area of interest for me. Some of my main takeaways from my system for 2024 were that I was still very much enjoying having that A5 notebook for my everyday journal, and while I did very much like my reading journal, doing those browns and beiges did get a little bit tiring, even though I liked the way it looked. So I knew I wanted to move into a new reading journal for the new year, and in terms of those long-term collections, I knew that we probably needed to retire that notebook, bring in a new one with updated collections, just give it a bit of a revamp, and possibly also split out the swatches so that I could have them in their own dedicated space. One of my favorite parts about New Year planning though is the introduction of experimentation, and for 2024 I had several experiments that I ran with varying levels of success. The first experiment is what I was calling cyclic planning. Rather than planning to the months, I was planning to 4-week blocks. This meant that every month or cycle had the same amount of time in it, which just really helped me get a better grasp of the passage of time, being much better able to recognize how much time I had left in any given cycle compared to a month where the calculation is a little bit more messy. While I didn't necessarily continue calling them cycles in my journal, instead just kind of opting to call them by their month name, but also most of the structures I used, at least in the second half of this year, I didn't even put the month name on these pages. Instead, I kind of just rolled from one month or cycle into the next, with really just the change in theme being the thing that indicated it was a new time period. Cyclic planning was definitely successful for me, so that's going to be one that I continue forward with. And another successful experiment I had was reset weeks. These were intentional weeks at the end of each quarter to get myself cool, calm, and collected for the upcoming quarter. While the actual structures that I used in my journal did have a tendency to change, just depending on what I was doing at any given time, the idea of having that set aside time to specifically rest, reflect, reset was just really valuable. This is also another one that I'm going to be bringing forward with me. An experiment that didn't work quite as well though was quarterly planning, in the sense of having specific quarterly setups in my journal. This kind of stuff just felt like regular start of journal pages, but in the middle of the notebook. Because I kind of recognized that after the second setup, or the setup for quarter 2 though, when it came to doing the setup for quarter 3, I just made this for both quarter 3 and 4, so more of a half-year setup. Another experiment that didn't work quite as well as I was hoping was fortnightly planning. This was something I'd actually trialed in the December before 2024, and I'd found it worked quite well then, but as I brought it into the new year, it started off pretty okay. So we have a Dutch door here for the 2 different parts of my fortnightly planning, so meal plan, work tasks, habits, that kind of thing. By the time we got into February, or cycle 2, I found I just wasn't keeping up with this. What I've instead found works really well for me is doing these little simple weekly dashboards, just a little space for meals, priorities, routines, and putting that in amongst my daily logging. This has definitely been a really good way for me to plan in the second half of the year, so I'll probably be moving forward with that rather than the fortnightly stuff. Another experiment that I started off the year with was the high bar, low bar approach to habit building. Essentially, you set 2 different levels of achievement for your habits, so the high bar being what you realistically would like habit completion to look like, and then the low bar being something really small, very entry level. Essentially the difference between take a sip of water versus drink a liter of water. By making that entry level task be very, very simple, it effectively gives you a way to keep the habit alive, even on the days where realistically hitting the high bar just isn't achievable. I still really like this experiment, even if I didn't necessarily keep up with it throughout the entire of the year, so this one is kind of moving into 2025, just a little bit different. We could also say that the health journal was a bit of an experiment too. It's going to need a little bit of an adjustment, but it will be moving into the new year. But what else do I have in my new year lineup? My current lineup for 2025 includes my first everyday journal, that one being in this A5 Nostalgia Collection notebook from Archer and Olive. I'm continuing forward with my yearly collections journal, because I still have space in that one to set up at least 2025 and probably also 2026. The old long-term collections journal is being retired and getting replaced by a new long-term collections journal in this red linen A5, also from Archer and Olive. and also the addition of a new swatch book, that one being in a B6 size with the crescent moon detailing. Funnily enough, that one is also from Archer and Olive, mainly because I wanted those swatches to be on the kind of paper that I'm using for the majority of my notebooks, so it makes sense to have that in an Archer and Olive notebook. The 5-year journal still has a couple years to go, so that one gets to stay in the lineup, and I'm also going to be continuing forward with the goal planner because that still has plenty of space to plan out more goals. That one's going to be one that lasts a while. I'm going to use it year after year, just depending on how long it takes to fill it up. I don't really need to switch to a new goal planner each year, and I also like that it acts as kind of like a record of accomplishment year upon year if I have all of those things in there. Although the reading journal still has a little bit of space at the back of it, I'm going to be retiring this one and bringing in a new reading journal. That one's going to have some different styles of setups where the theme changes each month, and we'll also have videos on the channel for those monthly setups. Make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss out if you want to see more reading journal content. The R&D notebooks that still have space in them are going to get carried into the new year, and once I've used those up, I'll be bringing in some new R&D notebooks because I know I'm going to need more of those next year. Anytime I make these idea videos for the channel, I do end up using quite a bit of space, and just one a year isn't going to cut it. The Scribble books that are full are going to get retired, and the ones that haven't quite been finished yet are going to get used up, and if I manage to use those up completely throughout the year, I'm thinking that I might use some of the LT1917s that I have in my collection to be my next Scribble book. I think this will be a good way to just use up some of the extra space that I have in those LT1917s, because I don't typically use those for idea videos on the channel, just because when I make those idea videos, I don't want there to be any ghosting or bleeding, and that can happen in those notebooks. The health journal I'm also continuing forward with, but I'm thinking of other things that I could add in there to make it so that I check in with it more regularly. Even if that's just identifying other areas of health that I might want to explore and research and take the notes down in that notebook. In terms of planner experimentation for the new year though, I'm really just going with one big experiment, and that's doing a life admin gamification system where I take all of those things that I probably should do more of and start awarding myself points for them. In my everyday journal, I'm going to have a summary of the different rewards I get for leveling up my character, just based on how many points I'm accumulating across the year. And then in my yearly collections journal, I have things like my character summary, objectives or goals that I'm working on, and then also things like side quests and other fun things too. After the success that I found with cyclic planning and reset weeks, I am very excited to be going to this gamification system, and this is effectively like the next level up from the high bar, low bar approach. All of those typically low bar tasks for any routines I'm trying to build, those ones will give me the smallest number of points, whereas a higher level of completion or something that feels a little bit more challenging, a little more time costly, that one will give me more points. I'm eager to see how it actually works out though, very excited to get started. Of course, we do also have a video up on the channel already that explains how it works and how you can get involved. There are definitely a decent few notebooks in my lineup, maybe a few more than most people would have, but all of them serve a purpose, they have a function, and I'm really excited to use them. Let me know how many notebooks or journals are going to be in your planner lineup for next year. Are they all just kind of like dot grid bullet journal-esque? Do you have any pre-printed planners that you're going with? Let me know in the comments. But if you wanted to see the setups that I've done for 2025, because I've already shared those on the channel, then this playlist is the next one to check out. That one has all of my 2025 setups so that you can get inspired for your own. So click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.